No one ever tells you how love can quietly corrode your sense of reality, turning the familiar into something strange and unrecognizable. I never expected to find myself standing in a rain-slicked alleyway, clutching a cup of lukewarm coffee that tasted more like memories than caffeine. I was 28, exhausted from months of mourning, each day a fog I couldn't seem to lift. Grief had flattened me, leaving only hollowed-out remnants of who I once was, trying to breathe through the silence that now filled my life. That night, I wandered into the old bookstore on Main, a place I'd visited countless times but never truly seen until then. The scent of aging paper and dust wrapped around me like a familiar shroud. The dim overhead light flickered intermittently, casting shadows that danced like ghosts against the shelves. It was quiet, save for the soft hum of a distant rainstorm and the faint scrape of a book being pulled from its shelf. I paused, glancing at the spines, feeling the weight of stories I no longer believed in. That's when he appeared, an unassuming figure in a dark coat, standing almost too still, as if waiting for me. His eyes caught mine, an intensity that made my stomach tighten. Not aggressive, but something else, an unwavering focus that felt almost predatory. He spoke softly, his voice low but clear, like a secret wrapped in velvet. "You look like you're searching for something that's already found you." The words hung in the air, strange but deliberate, as if he had rehearsed them in a different life. I tried to smile, but my throat felt tight. There was an odd familiarity in his gaze, as if he saw through my defenses, knew my pain before I admitted it aloud. The flickering light above seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. He stepped closer, and I noticed his hand brushing against mine as he reached for a book on the shelf, an old poetry volume that seemed out of place amid the modern clutter. When he touched my hair, a shiver ran down my spine, not from cold, but from the odd intimacy of it. His fingers lingered just a moment too long, and I caught a glint of something unreadable in his eyes. He offered a cryptic compliment about my choice of poetry, words that felt rehearsed yet oddly meaningful. I couldn't help but wonder if he knew me, really knew, before I even knew him. A gust of wind slammed against the window, rattling the glass and startling me. It was as if the universe was knocking on a door I wasn't prepared to open. As he spoke, I noticed a small poem had fallen from the shelf, drifting softly to the floor between us. I bent to pick it up, feeling the paper's fragile texture, sensing that this moment was a fragile bridge, one I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. His gaze never wavered, fixed on me with a strange, unwavering certainty that made my skin crawl. I wondered if I was merely a passing shadow to him, or if I had already become part of something darker, something I couldn't see yet. Back then, I thought it was romantic, an encounter that could change everything. Now, I wonder if it was the first time I was truly being watched, not just by him, but by something else lurking just beyond the edge of sight. I didn't know it then, but I was already stepping into a story that would never truly let me go. He always left at midnight, but somehow, I convinced myself that it was just a strange coincidence, that the universe had aligned our paths in a way I couldn't quite understand. Each night, I found myself waiting, eyes fixed on the shadows that stretched across the room, hoping for a sign of his return. When he finally appeared, it was as if the darkness had woven itself into the fabric of our connection, making everything feel more real, more urgent. He remembered the little things I said, those fleeting thoughts I barely thought mattered, and later, he would repeat them back to me, as if they were sacred secrets only he was privileged to hold. Once I mentioned how I loved the scent of rain on dry earth, and the next day, he brought me a small glass jar filled with soil and a single droplet of water, whispering, "Thought you'd like a piece of the storm." It was strange, how he seemed to understand my world with such precision, like I was the only person who saw the colors of the sky in a way that no one else could. He shared stories about himself, vulnerable, raw moments that made me feel seen in a way I'd never experienced before. He told me about nights when the darkness felt like a heavy blanket, how he sometimes felt lost in the silence, just like I did. It was as if he was trying to mirror my loneliness, making me believe that his pain was somehow intertwined with mine. And in those quiet confessions, I felt a strange comfort, an illusion that we were two souls tangled in the same shadow, destined to find each other in this darkness. He praised me. Not in the usual way, but with an almost possessive tenderness. "No one sees the world like you do," he whispered one night, his voice low and husky. "You're rare. No one else could understand the way your mind dances between chaos and calm." His words made me feel unique, like I was the only one who truly mattered to him. But beneath that, I sensed a quiet insistence, a need to claim my attention as if I belonged to him in some unspoken way. Then, softly, he began to question who I was texting, those brief messages I exchanged with friends, fleeting reminders of a life beyond him. "Do they really know you like I do?" he asked, voice gentle but with an edge that made my stomach tighten. I told myself it was devotion, that he only cared, that he wanted to protect what was fragile within me. But every time he asked, I felt a subtle shift, as if my independence was slipping away and I was starting to live for his approval. He brought me a gift one evening, a single, dark purple flower that matched my tattoo. He handed it to me with such precision, as if he was carefully choosing a reflection of something private. I noticed how he watched me, mirroring my gestures unconsciously, trying to connect through small, shared movements. When he touched my journal, my favorite book, or a photograph I kept hidden, he said it made him feel closer to me, as if these objects were portals into my soul. In silence, we sat together, the room filled with a quiet tension that made my skin feel exposed, vulnerable to his gaze. I found myself answering him faster, canceling plans, eager for his praise, desperately craving the feeling of being enough. As I did, I felt a strange internal shift, a need to mold myself into what he seemed to want, to become the person who could hold his attention forever. Sometimes, I caught myself thinking, what if this is love? But then, a darker question lurked, if obsession feels like protection, was I ever truly safe? He made me feel like I mattered, yet I started to wonder at what cost I was giving myself away. It was as if I was slowly disappearing into the space between us, losing the boundary that once kept me whole. And deep down, I sensed that the night was only beginning to reveal what lurked behind his quiet, watchful eyes, waiting to see how much I would surrender before I realized I might never find my way back. It was as if a faint static had seeped into my mind, distorting even the clearest thoughts. Every time I tried to grasp my own memories, they slipped away like shadows flickering at the edge of my vision. The world around me felt softer, less defined, like I was walking through a fog that refused to lift. His presence had become woven into the fabric of my days, an invisible thread tightening with every passing moment, but it never felt overt. Instead, it was subtle, like the gradual fading of a familiar song that suddenly sounds foreign. He'd show up when I least expected, claiming I was in the neighborhood, as if that explained everything. Sometimes, I'd find him sitting silently on my couch, as if he'd been there all along, waiting. His voice notes arrived constantly, each one a gentle inquiry, where I was, who I was with, as if he needed to know every detail to keep me safe. I'd listen, nodding to myself, trying to reassure that these weren't threats, just care. But beneath that veneer, I sensed an unspoken demand, a quiet insistence on control that I couldn't quite name. He suggested I spend less time with my friends or family, whispering that they stressed me out, that I needed to focus on what truly mattered. His words sounded tender, even protective, but I felt the subtle shift, an erasure of my independence. My routines began to bend, shaped by his preferences. Meals were planned around his schedule, my sleep hours adjusted to his whims. He'd comment softly, "You need rest," as if he was saving me from myself, but I noticed how my days grew smaller, confined within a space that felt like his design. Sometimes, I caught myself questioning what I remembered. Did I say that? I'd wonder, confusion clouding my mind. He'd tell me, "You're misremembering, babe," with such certainty that it felt like a truth I couldn't challenge. When I'd bring up something I distinctly recalled, he'd brush it off, saying, "You always do this when you're overwhelmed, like you invent problems." His words echoed in my head, twisting my perception, making me doubt my own clarity. I felt like I was unraveling, my thoughts fragmented, slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. My days felt like smudged chalk, once precise, now impossible to trace. The edges of my reality blurred, and I wondered if I was losing my mind, or if he was slowly erasing it. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I barely recognized, her expression hollow, her eyes searching for something lost. It was as if I was wallpaper peeling, layers coming undone, revealing a hollow shell beneath. I fought to hold on to parts of myself, but it became harder. I canceled plans without explanation, afraid of upsetting him. I'd laugh when I wanted to cry, trying to hide the ache. I rehearsed responses, crafting careful words to avoid provoking his quiet anger. I hid pieces of who I was, afraid they'd be taken away if he discovered. It was a constant battle between my instincts and the need to keep him close, to keep the illusion of love alive. I told myself he was just scared to lose me, I whispered inside, but the words sounded hollow. Why did it feel like I was the one disappearing? As the days blurred together, I kept asking myself, what was love, really? And at what point did love turn into something else entirely, something I couldn't name, but felt creeping over me like a shadow I couldn't escape? Each silent question left me trembling, wondering if I was losing myself in the quiet, invisible grip he had on my life. Every day, I found myself quietly surrendering little pieces of who I was. It wasn't a conscious decision, not a dramatic choice, I just felt the weight of his gaze, the unspoken expectation that I should be easier, softer, less myself. So, I deleted the social app one used to keep in touch with friends, telling myself it was for my own peace, but really, I was silencing the part of me that demanded connection beyond his reach. It felt like a small act of love, or maybe obedience, a way to prove I was doing better, that I was willing to change. When he didn't want to go to my birthday dinner, I didn't push. Instead, I skipped the celebration altogether, telling myself I didn't want to bother him, that I didn't need it anyway. But inside, I felt a hollow ache, as if I was erasing a celebration of myself, my life, my moments, because I was afraid of disturbing the fragile piece I'd started to cling to. Every time I hid a photo of myself laughing with friends, I wondered if I was losing my memories, or if they were just fading under the weight of his quiet disapproval. I started to avoid the mirror, not because I didn't want to see myself, but because I was afraid of what I'd find. When I caught my reflection, I saw someone I barely recognized, smaller, quieter, more subdued. I never wore that old dress again, the one I loved, because he said it was too revealing, too loud. Instead, I slipped into neutral colors, blending into the background, becoming someone more acceptable, more invisible. I told myself it was just practicality, but I knew deep down I was shrinking. He never raised his voice, never demanded outright. Instead, he gently implied that I'd become less caring, less loving. You used to be more affectionate, he said softly, with a hint of disappointment that I couldn't quite place. I would smile, nod, and try to be more attentive, but inside, I was unraveling. I thought that if I could just be better, more attentive, more obedient, maybe I could hold on to the faint flicker of his affection. But with each small sacrifice, I felt myself slipping further away, as if I was becoming an echo of the person he once loved. Sometimes, I caught myself whispering, "I'm doing this for us," even as I watched my reflection fade into a ghost of who I'd been. I'd say I loved him, but I felt smaller, less real, as if I was disappearing beneath the surface. I told myself I was choosing peace, but I wondered if I was just choosing silence, silence for myself, silence for my needs. Every act of self-denial left a faint crack in my voice, in my heart, as if I was slowly dissolving into the shadows he preferred. And yet, I kept going, afraid that if I stopped, I'd shatter completely. I could feel my mind fraying at the edges of my identity dissolving into a fragile mosaic I no longer recognized. I was tired, so tired, of fighting to hold on to who I was. I knew I was giving up things that mattered, small, insignificant things, but they felt monumental in that quiet, devastating way. I wondered, as I sank deeper into this hollowed-out version of myself, how much longer I could keep pretending I was still there, still real. Because some part of me knew, I was already slipping beyond the point of return. I woke up and looked around, but nothing felt familiar. The room was the same, yet somehow it had shifted overnight, like a dream that lingers after waking, slipping away the moment I reach for it. I avoided the mirror, terrified of what I might see, an unfamiliar face staring back, shadows where my reflection should have been. My thoughts felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else, a voice whispering from the edge of consciousness. I could no longer tell if these were my feelings or his, carefully planted and nurtured until they grew into my new truth. Sometimes, I'd catch fragments of memories, scattered images, half-remembered words, that dissolved before I could grasp them. Did I really say that? Did I really do that? Or was it just his version, rewritten to fit his narrative? My mind felt like a puzzle missing most of its pieces, with only sharp, jagged edges remaining. I'd wake up in the morning with no idea what day it was, as if the calendar had been erased, leaving only a blank space where my history once lived. He was everywhere, even in the silence. I'd find my journal replaced, the pages blank or filled with unfamiliar handwriting, his handwriting, rewriting my thoughts, erasing my voice. The playlist I cherished was gone, replaced by a new one he made, songs that echoed only his words. He changed the wallpaper on my phone, the colors darker, more muted, as if to match the fading light within me. Each small act was a silent erasure, a gentle but relentless stripping away of who I was. Sometimes, I'd try to resist. I'd cry out internally, pleading for clarity, for the girl I used to be to emerge. But even my own thoughts felt foreign, like echoes bouncing off walls I no longer recognized. I'd find myself repeating his truths, words that didn't belong to me, and I'd wonder when I'd lost the ability to speak for myself. It felt like I was being rewritten in his handwriting, lines smudged and distorted, a distorted version of my own story. He decided what I could see, what I could think, what I could feel. He told me that my memories were illusions, that my feelings were overly dramatic. "You're being dramatic," he'd say softly, as if that made everything okay. He erased contacts from my phone, claiming it was for my own good, though I sensed it was to tighten his grip. Decisions about my life, what to wear, who to speak to, where to go, were no longer mine. They were his, cast in shadows I couldn't escape from. My inner world was fracturing, splintered into shards I couldn't piece back together. Sometimes, I felt the flicker of a flickering light, hope, perhaps, or a flickering memory of who I used to be. But it was faint, distant, like a whisper carried away by the wind. My voice sounded foreign, even in my own mind, a stranger speaking from within. I wondered if I was still there, buried beneath layers of his control, or if I had already vanished into the darkness he shaped around me. Maybe I hadn't vanished yet, but I could no longer remember the girl I used to be. Her face, her voice, her dreams, they all felt like distant echoes, fading into the background of a life slowly rewritten in someone else's hand. I was losing myself, one fragment at a time, until I wasn't sure if I was still alive inside. If I was still in there somewhere, I couldn't find her anymore. I only knew I was drifting, dissolving into the shadow of who I once was, uncertain if I'd ever find my way back. My reflection no longer followed me, it moved out of sync, as if the mirror itself had become a distorted portal. I'd catch glimpses of myself, but my eyes felt distant, hollow, as though I was watching a stranger's face flicker in and out of existence. Sometimes, I'd stare at my own handwriting, trying to read what I'd written the day before, only to find the words unfamiliar, twisted into shapes I couldn't recognize. My memories blurred, the days in that room, the conversations, the laughter, faded into a fog I couldn't trust. I'd forget how long I'd been there, lost in a space that felt more like a cage than a home. And then, his voice. It echoed when no one was near, a whisper that slithered through the silence, insidious and persistent. I'd hear him calling my name, or whispering promises I hadn't made, as if he'd slipped inside my mind and was rewriting my thoughts. I'd catch myself answering, even when I knew I was alone. My reflection, my voice, my memories, they all felt like borrowed pieces, fragments I no longer owned. It was as if my mind was unraveling, thread by thread, and I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The world around me subtly shifted, a picture frame that once hung straight now tilted at an odd angle, the photograph inside faded into a ghostly blur, the colors draining away. Clothes I recognized vanished, replaced overnight with unfamiliar garments that felt wrong against my skin. My playlist switched without my input, melodies that once comforted now twisted into unsettling lullabies. It was as if someone else was rearranging my entire existence, pushing me further into the shadows of my own mind. Inside, I could feel him, his presence not just in my thoughts but woven into the fabric of my consciousness. His voice echoed louder than mine, even in silence, commanding my attention. I'd catch glimpses of memories that didn't belong to me, moments I couldn't recall creating, yet somehow I accepted them as true. I started questioning if my memories were mine at all, or his. Even my dreams had rules now, and they were his rules. Despite all this, a faint flicker of resistance remained buried deep within me. I found an old photograph I thought had vanished, tucked away in a dusty corner. It showed a childhood moment I'd long forgotten, innocent, pure, real. I clung to that image, feeling it anchor me, however tenuously, in some shred of authenticity. I discovered a note in my handwriting, one I didn't remember writing, but it held a defiant message I couldn't ignore. Somewhere beneath the chaos, a voice whispered that I was still in there, buried beneath layers of manipulation and illusion. There was a whisper beneath the silence, and I prayed it was me. I knew I was slipping, losing pieces of myself with each passing day, but I clung to that fragile hope, that somewhere inside, a core of truth still flickered. Perhaps I was still alive, still fighting, even if I couldn't see or feel it clearly. I had to believe I was still in there somewhere. Before I forgot everything again, I had to remember who I was, even if it meant risking everything to find that faint, flickering light within. My mind felt like it was shattering from the inside out, as if a thin glass was being pushed to its limit and finally snapped. I was staring at the photo he left on my dresser, one I'd seen 100 times before, and suddenly, it looked wrong. The colors bled into each other, the edges blurred, as if the image itself was dissolving. But what haunted me more was the figure in the corner, my reflection, distorted, twisted into a stranger's face I didn't recognize. I blinked, desperately trying to hold on to the memory, but it slipped away like water through my fingers. I sank to my knees, trembling so violently I thought I might collapse. My breath hitched and caught, like a trapped animal clawing at my ribs. The room spun around me, the walls stretching and contracting, and I realized I was no longer sure what was real. Everything was a lie, a carefully constructed illusion I'd been living inside for so long, yet I couldn't tell if I was unraveling or if I'd always been unraveling. Maybe both. Then I heard it. A voice, soft, almost familiar, whispering from somewhere deep inside my mind. It was not him. It was not me. It was a hollow echo, a ghost of my own voice, calling me by a name I'd never used for myself. I froze. The sound was so eerily precise, so impossibly wrong, that I felt my stomach turn inside out. My brain scrambled to process it, but all I could feel was the weight of everything I'd lost, myself, my voice, any certainty I once had. A tiny, cruel voice inside me hissed that I was already gone, that this was just the final step in a slow, silent death I hadn't even realized I was dying. I looked at the mirror across the room, my reflection staring back, hollow-eyed, like a stranger peering out from behind a mask. I wondered if I'd ever truly been myself or if I'd always been just an echo of someone else's design. The walls around me felt like they were closing in, pressing down, and I wondered how much more I could take before I shattered completely. What if I wasn't just losing myself? What if I was already gone? I thought about running, hiding, screaming, but I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, heavy as stone, as if I was rooted to this spot by invisible chains. Every part of me was trembling, yet I couldn't cry or scream or fight back. I simply sat there, caught in the suffocating silence that screamed louder than any noise. A flicker of clarity pierced through the chaos, fragile but undeniable. I knew I wasn't okay. I knew I was teetering on the edge of something I couldn't control, something that wanted me to forget who I was, to surrender completely. And still, I hesitated. I clung to the smallest shred of resistance, the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, I could still choose. Or was I already too far gone? I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, trying to find some anchor in the darkness. My mind was a storm of doubt and fear, each thought a whisper of surrender. I considered running, hiding, calling someone, anyone, to pull me out of this nightmare. But I didn't move. I stayed rooted, trembling, with a voice inside whispering that I was close to breaking, so close I could taste it. And in that silence, I whispered my own name, trying to remember if it still belonged to me. I sat on the edge of my bed, the familiar hum of the night filtering through the window, and I reached for my phone, craving a moment of normalcy. The screen flickered softly, and I scrolled absent-mindedly, searching for something, anything, that felt real. Then I saw it. A message from someone I thought I'd abandoned, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. "Are you okay?" My heart stuttered. I stared. The message was plain, but it pierced through the fog of my mind like a shard of glass. I didn't remember sending it, or even typing it. My fingers hesitated, then trembled as I scrolled back through the threads. Nothing. No trace of this message in my history, yet there it was, blinking innocently on the screen. And then, a photo appeared, a snapshot of me in my living room, but I didn't recognize the scene. The lighting was off, shadows pooling in corners I'd never noticed before. I saw myself, sitting on my couch, eyes vacant, holding a cup I didn't remember drinking from. My hands looked strange, unsteady, almost robotic, like they'd been trained to move in a rhythm that wasn't mine. I blinked rapidly, trying to dismiss the oddity, but the image stayed, etched into my mind with an unsettling permanence. I looked around, but the room felt wrong, unfamiliar. Walls seemed to warp at the edges, curtains hanging in unnatural folds. My reflection in the mirror was distorted, my face too smooth, too still. I reached for my hairbrush, but my hand moved on its own, brushing my hair with a mechanical rhythm. I'd never done that before, not like that. It was as if a stranger had taken control, choreographing my every motion. A cold wave of dread washed over me as I noticed something else. The photo frame on the shelf was turned slightly, out of place. I never touched it. Its glass glinted softly, mocking, alive. I could feel its gaze, accusatory in the silence. I hesitated, then looked away, but my eyes kept darting back to that small, twisted piece of my life I couldn't recognize. My pulse quickened as I remembered a call I never made, a voice that wasn't mine whispering in the void, telling me things I'd never spoken aloud. My closet held a dress I didn't remember buying, hanging there like a ghost. I reached for it, fingers trembling as I traced the fabric, feeling the impossible, my own handwriting, altered, distorted, a message I'd never written but somehow signed. The quiet horror seeped into my bones. The love I believed I'd shared, the tender words, the promises, was never love at all. It was a trap, a carefully constructed illusion. Every "I love you" was a lock clicking shut, sealing me inside a fabricated world. I saw now that he didn't fall for me. He built me, piece by piece, like a doll made of my own flesh. A shiver ran down my spine as the realization settled in, I wasn't his. I never was. And that terrified him more than anything. I was a story he wrote with my skin as paper, a game I'd been trapped in for so long I'd forgotten the taste of freedom. The illusion crumbled quietly, leaving me in a hollow, echoing silence. I felt my mind fracture, the edges of my perception tearing apart. I knew I had to act. But trust had vanished, replaced by a cold resolve. I wasn't sure what I would do, only that I could no longer stay. Somewhere deep inside, I began to plan my escape, knowing that the time to run was drawing near. The world around me had turned into a mirror of my shattered soul, and all I could do now was find a way out before I disappeared entirely. I waited until I heard him settle into sleep, then my heart pounded so loudly I thought it might betray me. Slowly, trembling, I reached for my phone, fingers trembling as I fumbled to unlock it. Every breath felt suffocated, as if the walls themselves were closing in tighter around me. I told myself I had to do this, had to take at least one step toward freedom. Even if it was small, even if I didn't know what awaited me on the other side. I packed only what I could remember buying myself, an old sweater, a worn-out pair of shoes, clinging to the hope that these fragments of myself might be enough to escape. My mind spun in chaos, trying to resist the flood of fear that threatened to drown me. What if he's already in my head? What if I'm just a puppet, moving on strings I can't see? Even the silence in the room felt like a trap, every creak, every breath outside the door echoing like a warning. My fingers shook uncontrollably, as if they didn't belong to me anymore, trembling with a fragile desperation that made my whole body ache. I tiptoed toward the door, the shadows stretching long across the floor. My pulse hammered in my ears. I was so close, I could almost feel the cool air outside, the possibility of real freedom. But then I heard it. A faint click, like a whisper of metal, right behind me. My body froze, my stomach twisting in a cold knot. Had I been discovered? Was he awake? No, I told myself, just a trick of the mind. I had to move, had to get out. The door handle was cold under my hand, and for a moment, I hesitated. What if I couldn't unlock it? What if it was locked from the outside? My breath hitched, and I forced myself to turn the knob. It moved, just slightly, and I slipped through, stepping into the hallway. The dim light flickered overhead, casting strange shadows that danced like specters. I moved quickly, clutching my bag, my heart racing so fiercely I thought I might pass out. Every step felt surreal, like I was walking through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Then I saw it, the mirror by the stairwell. I hesitated, my reflection staring back at me, gaunt, hollow-eyed, a stranger. I reached up instinctively, ripping at my necklace, which he gave me, as if tearing away a piece of him might also tear away the control. The chain snapped in my trembling hand, metal clattering to the floor. A small, symbolic rupture, something I could grasp, something I could break. But even as I did it, I knew the damage was only partial. The real fracture was inside, where his voice still echoed in my mind, whispering that I belonged to him. I almost made it to the front door, hand on the handle, when I heard it, the faintest sound, like a breath just behind me. I froze again, eyes wide, heart pounding so loud I feared it could be heard beyond the walls. Was he awake? Was he watching? My body refused to move, rooted by a terror I could no longer control. I stared at the door handle, trembling, knowing I was exposed now, more vulnerable than ever. I had cracked the glass, yes, but I could still see him staring through it, waiting. And I knew, with sick certainty, that when he realized I'd tried to break free, the final confrontation was coming. I didn't run. Not yet. I just stood there, trembling, heart pounding so loudly I thought it might give me away. The room was silent except for my ragged breathing and the faint echo of my footsteps fading into the dark. I clutched the torn pieces of the collar I had ripped free, feeling the sharp sting of pain and relief intertwining. For a moment, I thought I had escaped him, that I had broken the cycle, severed the invisible strings that held me captive. But deep down, I knew better. He was always there, lurking behind the shadows of my mind, even when I thought I'd left him behind. I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror, and for a second, I saw a stranger staring back, haunted, hollow, and fragile. The girl who once believed in herself was fading, replaced by someone who had learned to survive in the silence of manipulation and fear. I remembered the nights I spent erasing my memories, the times I had silenced my voice just to keep the illusion of peace. And now, standing here, I felt the weight of all those pieces pressing down on me. Then I heard it, a faint sound, almost imperceptible. The soft, deliberate footsteps approaching. My stomach clenched. It was him. I knew it was. Despite the distance I had put between us, he had found me, always did. I clenched the torn collar in my hand, feeling the remnants of his hold, and whispered a silent goodbye to the person I used to be. The girl who trusted, who loved, who believed in the good of things. She was gone now, replaced by someone who knew the truth, that the control had never been about him, but about what he did to my soul. As he entered the room, I didn't flinch. I looked directly into his eyes for the first time in what felt like forever. There was no fear, only a quiet, unwavering resolve. I had nothing left to lose. My voice trembled, but I spoke anyway. "It's over." The words felt strange, foreign even, but they tasted like liberation. I finally acknowledged the truth I had hidden for so long, that I was no longer his puppet, no longer the shadow of the girl I once was. He paused, eyes narrowing, a flicker of something unreadable flashing across his face. But I didn't care. I turned away, walking toward the door, feeling the cool air fill my lungs for the first time in months. I had no grand plan, no perfect ending, just a simple act of defiance, a step toward reclaiming myself. As I reached out to open the door, I looked back once more, and in that moment, I saw everything I had lost, everything I had fought for. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small, worn journal I had hidden. Flipping through the pages, I saw the words I had written in secret, confessions, fears, hopes I'd buried under layers of silence. I tore a page free, letting the words scatter like ashes. I whispered her name aloud, my name, and felt a strange peace settle over me, as if acknowledging my own strength was finally enough. Walking away, I knew I wouldn't forget. The scars, the memories, they would always be part of me. But I also knew I was no longer his victim. I had taken back my voice, my story, my life. Maybe I didn't survive him completely, but I survived enough to walk into the unknown, unshackled by the illusions that once haunted me. And as I disappeared into the night, I whispered to myself, maybe this is the end. Or maybe, just maybe, it's a new beginning.